a prototype for peace. There isn't even a door, there isn't even a key to open the door at the moment, and that's what we want to try and define in these in the next hour before 5:30. So let me invite, we have 7 guests, all of whom have deep experience in Russia and also in Ukraine and also more broadly as well on issues. I would put to you that there is one thing in war theory about you only really get peace, as we've seen with the Dayton Agreement in 1995 here. You only get peace when there's weariness among all the parties. And at the moment, I'd put to you, that is not the case. Let me now invite up the 7 guests. First of all, Baiba Braze, who is the Foreign Minister of Latvia, until recently was the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. Welcome. And also a former ambassador to the United Kingdom. She remembers Brexit, but we're not talking about that. Secondly, Olexandr Mischenko, welcome. He is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. And the reason why Alexander is coming up here now is because of the... Nice to see you. Is because of the challenge that he set out to me and his office set out to me before he left Kyiv. He said, what factors are holding back our collective efforts? This question, he says, requires frank discussion. And that's what we want to do for the next hour. Thirdly, Zeki Gumrukcu, who is the Turkish Deputy Foreign Minister, welcome. We want to find out from Turkey what kind of level of negotiation, what kind of level of contact is already underway. Is there any kind of framework for peace? Radmila Shekerinska, welcome. Ex-Defense Minister of North Macedonia, but is now Deputy Secretary General of NATO. Welcome. Important here is that both the Deputy Secretary General and the Foreign Minister of Latvia were in Copenhagen last Friday. So that's insight as well to build on what the High Representative was talking about this big meeting which was taking place there. Rafael Grossi, who is the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Nice to see you again. We will need to hear the vulnerabilities that there are still right across the war zone and why some kind of peace deal or some kind of cessation of hostilities is so vital. Bill Browder, welcome Bill. Nice to see you. Why is that important? Because Bill has a very difficult relationship with Moscow, going back to the early 2000s, particularly in 2005, when he was made essentially persona non grata. So we want an insight into how we understand the Russian psychology. And finally, Vojko, who is State Secretary here in Slovenia. And an important... Good to see you. Good to see you too. And one of the important reasons why Vojko is with us is because he was involved in the prison swap which took place in the middle of last year and understands how the Russians negotiate. So we have a variety of ideas and a variety of perspectives, but the overall question is about Ukraine. Are we on a long road to peace? Can peace even happen? Or are we heading for a stalemate of some kind like North and South Korea or something like that? But we don't really want to talk about it. Remember, Dayton took 3 years to negotiate before they got to Dayton itself, when it took about 3 months. These peace agreements take a long time. I'm going to be sitting here, but the reason I'm sitting here and with a swing chair is I want to bring others of you among the audience into the discussion after about half an hour. So think of what you want to raise based on what you hear from the platform. There are 4 microphones in the room. We've got to handle this pretty decisively to move the microphone around quite quickly. But please think of what you want to talk about, because we need your input as well. So welcome all 7 of you. Foreign Minister, first of all, let me come to you. What is your very clear impression about whether peace is even on the table? We heard from the High Representative what she said, and I repeat it again. We are not there or anywhere close to it.
The peace has never been off the table for the very reason that everybody wants peace, except Russia. So it's actually about really making sure that we have the transatlantic unity, that we continue pressure on Russia, and we continue support to Ukraine's self-defense, and invest in ourselves, in our own security and defense, because Russia has been recognized as a long-term threat to Euro-Atlantic security and every country's security in NATO.
But are we using the word peace too liberally on the assumption that somehow it will happen?
Russia, I mean, when we look at Russia, because that is the problem. It's not Ukraine that is the problem. Russia is our problem and will remain our problem, because the indicators that we see in Russia, whether that's politics, economy, military, religion, private sector, media, and so on and so forth, is very much oriented towards war. There's nothing else that we are seeing. And for that purpose, and analyzing from that angle, quite clearly, Russia is and will remain the threat. So until that situation is changed, there will be some difficulties getting to peace. But saying that peace is off the table, no, I'm not saying that. And as we have seen from the past, things change.
Olexandr, let me come to you as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, and that challenge that you laid down, and your office laid down very clearly, we need a frank discussion about all of this. What factors are holding back our collective action and efforts?
You know, my last position, I was ambassador in Latvia and spent 1 year of war in Latvia. And I remember in the beginning of war, great politician at that time, president of Latvia, Egil Levis, said that Putin, through this brutal aggression, shocked all of us. And now time of all of us shocked Putin by unity. The main points of peace, of way to peace, is unity all of us. If we will demonstrate unity to support Ukraine, to demolish this dictatorship regime of Putin, we will bring and press Putin for peace. Without it, for Putin, it's not necessary any peace, any negotiation. It's normal life for Putin, war. In war, it's a good condition for him.
But what is the frank discussion?
Frank discussion, why we, through 3.5 years, taking account, combine our potential, we cannot defeat Putin yet. It totally, European Union, Ukrainian army, USA, totally we're over that Putin regime has possibility. But from my point of view, we have all of our partners support us. But speed of these supporters and readiness of supporters is different. And Putin use it and try to undermine us. For example, Latvia, before Putin attacks Ukraine, gave us Stinger. I know that the Stinger, it was, for us, it's very important in first day of war, when the sabotage group tried to capture Gostomel airport close to Kyiv, and after that to capture Kyiv. It was planned for Kyiv. Only 75 Stingers. Getting from Latvia, we save our capital. If we will give Ukraine what we have now, a possibility, not considering that we have limited plan. For example, each country has their own plan of defense, and they preparing for aggression and take it, carry out, not give Ukraine because it's limited through their plan. But question is, what is the battle line in Ukraine? Is it Ukrainian front or front of whole European community?
But let me keep pressing you. What is missing? What is the frankness which is missing at the moment, which you want to highlight?
I want to spread information that if we will gather it all of our possibility, all of our efforts, and focus it for defeating Putin in the field of battle, we will win.
Right, let me go to Turkey, because we need a reality check. There is a process which is underway intermittently in your country, contacts at least. Give us an update on how that is going and what you take away about whether there is any willingness to talk in language which could lead to peace when it comes to exchanges of prisoners and other things which are being negotiated in that process. What is the mood in the contacts there?
Yeah. Of course, when we speak about Istanbul talks, there are two distinct processes. The first one was back in March 2022, right after the start of the war. And then, of course, recently, within the last 4 months or so. I'm going to speak more about the recent ones. Because later this year in May, following the US elections and the President Trump's increasing support for peace negotiations, the direct talks between the parties resumed again in Istanbul, but this time with Turkey also sitting in the same room with them. That's also showing their, I think, confidence in our ability to facilitate and conduct this sort of thing.
But what are you facilitating?
I have to say that, of course, despite some significant achievements in the humanitarian track, as you pointed out, exchange of, prisoners, and also some very good discussion about the kidnapped children, these 3 rounds of talks in Istanbul, the latest round of talks, have not yet yielded any considerable progress regarding ceasefire or peace. Ukraine rightly, of course, insisted on having a ceasefire first to allow room for real, healthy, meaningful negotiations, whereas Russia claimed that, it is possible, it's even necessary to first agree on the basic parameters of a peace agreement before any ceasefire. So there is this gap, irrespective of the substance of the talks, about how to proceed about that. But I think, given that this is one of the most complicated and violent conflicts of the 21st century, hoping to end this in just a few rounds of discussion, I think would have been quite naive. And I have to say that in all these 3 rounds of talks, increasingly lengthy consultations took place between the heads of delegations. And I think in a way that not only forged good rapport between the chief negotiators, but that also helped us build slowly a pratique, a culture, and a sort of a framework of negotiation.
So you are producing a framework which could be adapted, which could be built upon, you think?
I believe so. I'm still cautiously optimistic about that, and particularly because with this new momentum created by the Alaska talks between President Trump and Putin, and the ensuing meetings between Ukraine, US, and Europeans, including Turkey, I think we have to keep pressing on to maintain these direct talks and steer them in the right direction, which will hopefully produce something of a peace framework, which will not only bring fair and lasting peace to Ukraine, but also contribute to European security.
But there's no sense of negotiations there at all. It's discussion in a very basic way about humanitarian issues.
At this point, it's merely discussions, it's exchanging of positions, and they're still very far apart from each other. But I think that is the start of any process. And I think that's why we have to persevere. I understand the frustration, given the increasing Russian aerial attacks on major Ukrainian cities with unacceptable, intolerable collateral damage. But there is no alternative, rather than unrelentingly seeking peace. Because as we see it, there is hardly any possibility for a quick military victory on the battlefield, and there is hardly any possibility for a third country to come and impose a peace deal from outside. So I think it's up to Ukraine and Russia to get together, address those sensitive and difficult issues, and reach a negotiated settlement.
So what you're confirming is there is a limited contact process, but no more at the moment.
There is a process which we can hope more to come. That's right. How I'm going to put it in this way, I guess.
Right. The words are so important. Radmila, let me come to you. You were at the Copenhagen meeting, as with the other foreign ministers in this room. What was your impression, and what did you take away? What did you take back to Brussels from that meeting about the intentions and the commitment, and whether we should be talking about peace, however you want to define it?
I see that the main question that you are having is, are we heading for peace? And to a certain extent, it's understandable that while Putin is delivering terror over civilians predominantly in Ukraine now, it is very difficult to talk, envisage peace, and look for a positive outcome. But
can you define what peace is? Let me press you.
But the real issue is not only to assess the likelihood, because we come from this region, we know that peace processes are never straightforward, they're never quick, and they're never easy. That's at least the lesson I have from my experience in the Balkans. But instead of focusing so much on assessing the chances, our goal is to support the chances for a peace deal. And we believe that we can do so by supporting Ukraine today so that they can defend and deter future aggressions, but defend also today. And this is why it was really important post-Hague summit to focus very much on the military support to Ukraine. You remember some of the skepticism before the NATO summit. You remember some of our discussions like this. I think that the NATO summit really provided us with a clear image of transatlantic unity and action. And what happened after the summit was that words were not just declarations. I mean, just 2 weeks after the summit, we have had yet another meeting with the US president, which actually paved the way for this priority list for Ukraine on key military equipment, especially air defense and munition, to support Ukraine in this unprecedented attack on civilian and infrastructure. And in the course of 1 month after that meeting, we were able to agree on 4 packages, four Pearl packages, each of them €500 million, provided by a number of allies. And I do believe that we should focus more on how can we do this better, quicker, and how can all this be supported by more allies? Because I have heard at some of the ministerial meetings that allies, member states of the EU, are willing to continue the support, but they also believe more of a burden sharing is necessary. We need to support them with air defense, we need to support them with ammunition, we need to support Ukrainian drone industry with some additional funds. So it's all these things and the security guarantees that we should focus on rather than just weighing the chances. Because if we analyze too much but not really act upon some of our words, this is how we can leave
let us all be clear.
Ukraine on the dry.
What role does NATO play? Essentially, you're involved in weaponry, artificial intelligence, you're involved in HUMINT, you're involved in SIGINT, you're involved in seeing where the threats are coming from. Your Secretary General was in Washington, he was in Kyiv last week, a few days ago. Does NATO see itself as an agent for peace?
What I have said previously is a clear proof. The message we have sent in The Hague, the actions that the Secretary General undertook immediately after the Hague summit, the 2 visits to DC, the visit to Kyiv just before their Independence Day, this was meant to send a message not only to Kyiv, but to all allies and to our adversaries that we are supporting Ukraine. It will be support through Pearl, because by doing this we are supporting Ukrainian armed forces. This is the first line of defense. But we also need robust security guarantees, and this is why we have welcomed the initiative by France and the UK on the so-called coalition of the willing, where we participate.
Quickly,
Nik, can I just
let me just finish, if I may.
NATO's mission is peace. That's the single most important KPI for NATO.
That's what I'm trying to get us to understand.
It is. NATO is a peace alliance. NATO is there for peace.
You were Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy.
Yes, and that's, tell me where on NATO's territories there has been war since NATO was established in 1940.
So what I think we need to understand...
So that's what we want for Ukraine.
What I'm trying to help us understand is the contours for negotiating peace, whether NATO has a role in that, as an agent, if you like, for negotiation or contacts or building behind the scenes.
The role of NATO and the role of the Hague Summit was really to project and work on peace by projecting strength. And this was our key goal. Strength and unity was the goal of the summit, and this is what we delivered. But although, as we say, the alliance remains to be a defensive one, it is clear that without this strength, without the capability targets, without supporting Ukraine, this will be a paper tiger, you know? So the focus has to be to allow Ukraine to negotiate from a position of strength. We need to support them, and we need to, through the allies and the willing partners, to really support robust security guarantees, because peace needs to be sustainable. It cannot be a one-time decision.
Baiba, do you agree with that? After your time?
Absolutely, and it's actually Ukraine that is a guarantee for peace in Europe once we are successful in stopping Russian aggression. Because Ukraine has the biggest army, it's the biggest country in Europe, and democratic, strong, peaceful Ukraine will be something that is guaranteeing security, not just for Ukraine, but the whole of Europe. So pretty straightforward.
We have 3 other panelists, each with a specialty, which I need to focus on. Rafael, Grossi, let me come to you next, about atomic energy, nuclear energy. What is your assessment of how close to the cliff of real danger we are with Zaporizhzhia, with Chernobyl, and so on? You're not talking to experts in the nuclear field here, but on the other hand, when they see APCs and others driving through contaminated land at Chernobyl near that sarcophagus, which has been put up and a vast amount of money spent on it to make sure there was no leakage. Are we in danger of being overdramatic about understanding?
No, you're not being overdramatic, Nik. It's good to see you, good to be here. 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago, on this day, 1st of September, it was. And we crossed the front line. I was there with our experts to set up something unique that never happened before, which is an independent mission of the IAEA in an occupied territory, which is still today deployed in Zaporizhia. And what they have been doing, and we keep our fingers crossed because peace has not been achieved, and we are still in the process that you are all describing how difficult it is. But this thing, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, 6 gigawatts of installed capacity, you can imagine thousands of nuclear material there, had been shelled, has been subject to attacks of different kinds. And thanks to the fact that we have an independent presence from the international community there, we have been able to address a number of issues that so far have prevented a nuclear accident from adding to the misery of what has been happening there. Of course, it's not the only thing. And you rightly mentioned Chernobyl. You remember that just within days of the start of the invasion and the military actions there, Russia occupied Zaporizhia. They moved into South Ukraine. Within weeks, we were there. I was personally at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant that came quite close, and the Vice Minister may remember that, became quite close to being the second to be occupied at that time. And of course, Chernobyl, which they subsequently left. But the dangers did not stop there. As you are mentioning, in February this year, a number of attacks on the sarcophagus, on the new safety containment, have compromised this, of course, indispensable factor for security and for nuclear security and safety in the whole of Europe. We are not there yet. We continue our presence there. There is, and through the talks that we have been having, of course, with Ukraine, and I've been there 13 times since the war began, 6 times crossing the front line. So we are there, and we are not going anywhere until there is peace. We are engaged in trying to stabilize the situation, to maintain it as it is, and also to try to bring our help in terms of reconstruction.
Let me press you, because we're talking about how you have contacts with the Russians.
Of course.
I'll come on to Bill and Vojko in a moment. But what is your experience? Is it a dialogue of the deaf when it comes to you raising the alarm and saying, do you realize what will happen if you continue to do this?
Well, I think a way to answer your question, Nik, would be that we have been able to avoid the worst so far.
Through productive contacts or not?
Of course, direct contact. It's the only way. You know, I will say something very sincerely here. On occasion, many occasions, I've been personally criticized for engaging with, I've seen Putin more than once, President Putin, apart from all the others. And I have always said, if I don't talk to him, who do I talk to about the situation that they have created? How do I engage? And it's something I've discussed with your president many, many times, and I think it's essential when it comes to diplomacy, Ambassador. This is our job, to reach out, not only to present a position. There are many people who are, of course, doing this and expressing very vocally the sentiments that I think are widely shared. The essential thing here is to keep, and for this we have established a number of principles which boil down to don't shoot at a nuclear power plant, please. They have a more technical formulation, but we have been able to implement this by and large. Of course, it's a day-to-day effort, and hardly a day passes without an attack or a drone incursion or a blackout that leaves the station without external power supply.
Do you have a level of confidence building or not? Do you have a level of confidence with those?
We have a level of dialogue, and we are there. Confidence building, you know, at times of war is very, very difficult to establish. What you need to have is a presence, because another very, very important thing is that by being there, we have been able to avoid fake news. We have been able to avoid false narratives that could be emerging from this situation, because we are there. Every time there is something happening, our experts have the ability to go, to check, to talk to people. And even in very difficult personal situations that some of the Ukrainian staff had to endure there, we have been able, by being a presence on behalf of the international community, to do for them.
Rafael, for the moment, thank you. Bill, let me come to you. For the last 20 years, you've been declared a threat to Russian national security. You have a very clear idea about the Russians. What should we be understanding about the way they negotiate? And then I'll come to Vojko as well. But I need to hear from you about is there a degree of naivete here or not?
Total naivete. I was the canary in the coal mine. I had a sort of personal feud with Vladimir Putin long before the war started, and I got to see how this man behaved. And what I've learned about him, and this is all because of the Magnitsky Act, which imposes sanctions on Russia for human rights abuse.
After the death of Sergei Magnitsky.
After the death of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and Putin loves his money more than human life, and the idea of sanctioning his money was a great sin. And so we've been at it for 20 years or so, or 15 years. And what I've learned about Vladimir Putin is that he never backs down. He always escalates. And it's a Russian thing. It's not just with me and Vladimir Putin, it's the war, it's any conflict, there's no backing down. The only time that Putin ever backs down is if he's in a position where he has no choice. Putin started this war. This is a war of aggression. At any moment in time, if we wanted the war to end, if he wanted the war to end, he could just end it. He could say, I'm no longer occupying Ukraine, I'm going to withdraw my troops. Ukraine is defending, he's attacking. And so all this talk about peace negotiations, there's only one party to talk to, and that's Vladimir Putin. And if he doesn't back down, and I know he's not going to back down, because if he does back down, he looks weak. If he looks weak, he loses power. If he loses power, he dies.
Do you believe he understands the principle of peace, mir?
The only way that there is going to be peace if he's forced to be in a position. And how do you force him? And some of the things we just talked about forces him, which is if you give the Ukrainians the weapons they need, they can defend themselves. There's another thing which we can do, which is we can deprive Putin of money. And how do we do that? Donald Trump talked about it for several days before the Alaska summit. If he actually had followed through and imposed secondary sanctions on the buyers of Russian oil, on China, India, and Turkey, they wouldn't buy any more Russian oil. And if they didn't buy any more Russian oil, there's nobody else to buy the Russian oil. And if they don't buy the Russian oil, Russia runs out of money after 6 months. If they run out of money after 6 months, then Putin, potentially, without money to pay his soldiers, without money to pay for the Iranian and North Korean weapons, he might then say, okay, now we can talk about some type of negotiation. But you can't negotiate with anybody if they don't want to negotiate. He has no interest in negotiating because he's not in a weak position. There's one more thing we can do. And this is the most obvious thing in the world. We talk about it from time to time. The High Representative just talked about it. We're sitting on $300 billion of Russian money in the West. The United States has just said they're no longer going to fund Ukraine's defense, more or less. The United States makes up 40% of the funding of Ukraine's defense. Is Europe going to come up with that extra 40%? I don't think so. But the easy answer to this whole question is to confiscate the $300 billion and use that to fund the Ukraine's defense. And by the way, if we did that, then Donald Trump, who doesn't seem to want to do anything other than capitulate Ukraine to Putin, is not in a position, he has no more leverage. He's no more leverage. He can't tell anybody what to do if the money is coming from Vladimir Putin to fund Ukraine.
All right, now Vojko, thanks for being patient. I want to come to you because you've been involved in negotiations. You are State Secretary for National and International Security. And there was a remarkable spy swap which took place a year ago, after you arrested two Russian agent sleepers in 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, and you and others of your colleagues were involved in incredibly secret discussions which involved several Russian agents in other parts of the world. Help us understand what it is like to deal with them and what you were trying to work out and how you were trying to be bluffed and who you were dealing with, and therefore how effective negotiation can technically be with the Russians.
Well, thank you. Luckily, there is a book out already. So,
The Swap.
yeah, so it was called
But
Swap.
not everyone can read it in 10 minutes.
It's stressful. It was stressful, and like Bill said, I mean, they put on the table everything they wanted, and we had to put on the table everything we had.
Which included an assassin in Germany.
And that assassin was the hardest part, but we had to put it in the deal because otherwise there wouldn't be a swap. Swap for innocent people. Okay. We gave a murderer to swap for innocent people, journalists and other innocent people.
The Wall Street Journal correspondent.
Yeah. And for a girl that was arrested and we freed her, that got 8 years of prison for just putting the papers in the supermarket against the war. 8 years. We released also her. But what was the most stressful thing was that, I will stop there because there, everything is in the book, I don't want to.
Yeah, but you can summarize the book for us.
Book is good, but don't believe everything that's in the book. So it's a little bit romanticized, but that's okay. It always happens that. No, but the most frustrating thing, this is a good stage to tell it, was that me and my prime minister prepared the previous Munich security conference.
That's a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and we had a scheduled meeting with Kamala Harris there. And we were also to talk about the possible preparation to the swap that at that time was extremely secret. Just a couple of people in the world knew what was going on. But what happened there just one day before? Navalny died. And we knew it was a message for us. And it wasn't easy to survive that day. No, knowing that you was doing something that you will have to play along what Putin will demand in a very hardball way. We stopped working on the swap for at least 6 months. We had to. But then when we restarted, it was a serious job, a serious business. I never negotiated with the Russians directly, but I can tell you that...
Your colleagues did?
Yeah, intelligence and services do that extremely well, without a problem, let's say. But let me tell you that with Putin is one of those men who, when he will die, they will put him on the tombstone. Here lies the man that was always right. Always. He will never admit that he is wrong. He will never admit that he made a mistake. So how can you deal with them? And this is a real problem. And when I see the possible solutions, and I like to speak about those possible scenarios, I can only foresee 2 possible plausible scenarios to end the war.
Do you mean end the war or stop hostilities?
I mean, usually all the wars, before there is a peace agreement, stop with the ceasefire or stopping with hostilities or whatever. Here we have the strange demand of Mr. Putin to end the war with peace agreement without ceasefire. How does that work? You know how it's usually called, that situation? Capitulation. I was in a war in Slovenia. First we achieved ceasefire with Yugoslav army, and then we went to negotiate on Brioni Island with them. The same with Croatia to end the Croatian war. And when the Croatian war stopped, there was still part of Croatia, Posavina, that was 10 years under the protectorate of United Nations. So what we were trying to do with Putin was to have a ceasefire to stop the killings on the ground and to continue the war with diplomatic means instead of arms. So here are two possible scenarios with Mr. Putin. One is Finnish scenario, I call it, because one of the reasons Mr. Stubb was there in Washington was also the story of his country, who was attacked by a Red Army in '39. It was called Winter War. Finns bravely fought the Russian army. They stopped them, but the war ended with the cession of the territory from the Finnish part and the guarantees for their sovereignty on the other side. Then they were neutral, and today they are a member of NATO. But this is the scenario when Ukraine goes along and when Ukraine decides on whether this scenario can happen.
The second scenario
is Korean.
Stalemate.
Stalemate, Korean stalemate.
The war continues technically.
Hard freezing the front line and put the boots on the ground, because sometimes we are too reluctant even to speak about possible boots on the ground, while North Koreans have no trouble to put...
But you're talking about the continuation of a state of war.
No, I'm talking about,
about,
as you remember, there was stop of hostilities. There was on the 50th or the 51st of there. If there is no other way, we will prevent the majority of Ukraine, and we will, unfortunately, this is scenario. I'm not advocating this. The Finnish is much better. And then we will have a new Iron Curtain in Europe. New Iron Curtain, where on the European side we will live our European life, and on the Russian side of the Iron Curtain they will live their Asian life, because this is how it will work then.
Right. Let's pause at that point.
Okay.
Because I want to invite each of you. You've all come to the session with different ideas and different thoughts and different perspectives. I'm just going to ask for people who'd like to come in. There are 4 microphones, and I'd like you to command a microphone to come to you, because then I will come to you in about 5 or 6 minutes. But I want to get it organized so we can make best use of time. Olexandr, you wanted to come in a few minutes ago. Do you want to comment on anything you've just been hearing?
Yeah.
Particularly what we've just heard from Vojko.
Yeah, Putin never will agree for negotiation if he will perspective to win in battlefield. That's why I agree with my colleagues from NATO. NATO is an extremely important part of this process to how we gain peace, because if we equip Ukrainians with high technology weapon, and Ukrainian army is the base for future negotiation and peace negotiation. If we will support army, it gives possibility for justice, peace, for long-standing peace. Without it, we cannot reach it. That's why activity of NATO, especially after Gag's summit, it's completely different than before. It's now a concrete plan how to equip Ukrainian army through member possibility of to gain our facilities of our army, and after that it will be good position for negotiation. Without it, Putin never will agree, because for him, as they mentioned, war is a normal situation, and he will continue all time. We also will continue for fight. And if we will continue that, it will be losses of more Ukrainian soldiers, but we never will agree for frozen conflict, we will never agree for capitulation. Because we have 2 options for peace. Peace to push for Putin and to sit him, to press him for accept ideas that he will loser and he will have to release our territory, and after that it will be normal situation. Or second option, to push Ukraine to accept capitulation, and after that it will be housed in all of the world. That's why we all interested to support Ukrainian army is the basic position for future negotiation, and through all activity we push Putin to recognize this situation. Without it, we can never reach the peace.
Baiba and Radmila, what's your reflection of what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, about whether this is a path which is developing? In other words, the garage door could somehow be made open to some kind of process. But I don't sense any kind of optimism here or positiveness among all of you and others elsewhere, and indeed from the High Representative.
Various scenarios are possible. Remember, Germany was divided Remember, Baltic states were occupied, and we were told, oh, don't ask for full regaining of independence. You know, you're going to destabilize and this and that. So we knew what we were doing. We knew that we were right, that we could do it, and we did it. My first portfolio in the foreign ministry was Russian troop withdrawal portfolio as a young lawyer. State sovereignty issues, and we did it. After 50 years of occupation. My parents were born in the 30s when Latvia was independent. So regaining territories, regaining people, regaining statehood is possible. Uniting Germany was possible. But it requires force. It requires to be strong ourselves. So 5% for defense is not a joke. We need that, because that is the first precondition. It requires transatlantic unity. It requires strong Ukraine. And it requires pressuring, butchering Kremlin to believe that he's weak, and there is no other option.
Yeah. Let me say peace is possible, but we do need both parties to engage. And we have seen the commitment of Ukraine. They are prepared to negotiate for peace. We haven't seen the commitment from the Russian side. The only way we can push them into real negotiations on long-lasting peace is supporting Ukraine and sending this message that our commitment to Ukraine will not disappear tomorrow, that we are here for the long process even, but also to increase the price of war to Putin. You know, through sanctions, through the discussion about frozen assets is not something that NATO engages in, but I have participated at some of the meetings and heard some of the heated EU ministers discussing it. The war has to be expensive. It has to cost him politically if he is to engage in negotiations. But the engagement of the US president is something that we have welcomed. You know, we do need to start discussing and thinking about peace negotiations, but it's not just an analysis. It cannot be just words. It has to be through a sustained effort to support Ukraine and through a sustained effort of the coalition of the willing, ready to send the so-called reassurance first, the security guarantees that will support Ukraine. Without these elements, it will be very difficult. But there is a chance, and we have to do our best, and we have to deliver on our side, from our responsibility, so that Ukraine can really negotiate from a position of strength.
Rafael, can I just ask you, do you feel at every stage you are dealing with Putinistas, right from the top to the bottom, on something as so important as nuclear security? People who only think like him.
Well, I think they do understand. We should not forget that Ukraine and Russia are nuclear countries, are countries that have vast nuclear infrastructure. For Ukraine is a lifeline, really. Without the 9 remaining nuclear reactors, the whole country would have collapsed. And I think the way in which the energy infrastructure has been kept in very difficult circumstances has been really heroic. I think, but engagement is necessary from our technical point of view, because it is obvious that without that, the possibility of reconstruction would be impossible. Now we are working also on reconstruction. We were just in Rome a few weeks ago, and the IAEA is supporting Rivne, Magnitsky, South Ukraine, and at Magnitsky, the construction of two new units that are going to be built to ensure the reconstruction. And it's very important that we have these dialogues, for example, with the regulators, where you can, Russian regulators, for example, nuclear regulators, when you can expose the kind of things, the kinds of issues that are perhaps too technical or boring discussing here, but which are being fleshed out and discussed with them in terms of the consequences of certain things happening.
Thank you very much. Right, who's got the microphone? Yulia from Ukraine, I think. Please, and also Nicola from North Macedonia, I was told about. A quick intervention, please, from you.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm from Ukraine, and no one wants peace more, just peace more than Ukrainians. But I want to move our discussion even farther. what after peace? What after peace agreement, no matter how, like, it matters how it will look like, of course. But the question is how the Europe and the world will engage with Russia strategically after this peace. Because Europe, the US, were trying for a long time from the fall of the Soviet Union to engage with Russia economically, diplomatically, and there were assumptions that it will help.
All right. Okay, good. Nicola from North Macedonia, where are you? Please.
Thank you. So it is a long road to peace, and we've discussed this, but on that road, there is a second question that follows, I think, every single one of us. And that is the ancient norm, which is inscribed in Article 4, in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, the prohibition of the use of force. And my question to the panel is, how do we, on this road, also revive the values and the norms of international law, and especially the ancient norm of the prohibition of the use of force?
Thank you. You're raising what the Deputy Prime Minister and also the President raised very explicitly this morning. One more. Have you got a microphone? Who else has got a microphone? Get a microphone, please, over there, please.
Thank you.
Tell us who you are, please.
My name is Petre Claudiu Platon from Romania National Administration Association. I have a question for Bill, because he pointed out the question about the money, of Putin's money. So the idea is if we want to shorten the way, the road to the peace in Ukraine, one measure is to confiscate Putin's money. Why don't we do it?
All right.
Are we afraid,
Bill, why
the bear, that we will hurt him? Thank you.
Your business is asset management. Why are we not doing it?
We're not doing it because we have a lot of government officials. So actually, let me step back. After the war started, me as a finance guy, I said, how can I contribute to helping Ukraine? And I said, the obvious thing is to confiscate the 300 billion. And I've been working on that for 3 years, and I've met with many government officials, parliamentarians, et cetera. And what started out as a complete non-starter, everyone said it's against the law. It's not against the law to invade a neighboring country and destroy their country, but it's against the law. They're protected by sovereign immunity, supposedly. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, why don't we change the law? And the United States actually did that. The United States created something called the Repo Act in the Biden administration, which allowed them to confiscate the money in the United States. In the EU, we haven't done that. In the UK, we haven't done that. In Canada, actually, Canada has done that. But then there's this sort of, I would say, unrealistic expectation that there is some type of possibility of negotiating. We're up here talking about negotiating peace. We can't negotiate peace with a guy who's absolutely dead set on war. Putin has not altered his expectations 1 centimeter from the very beginning. He doesn't want peace. And so if you go around the European Commission, they're all saying, well, you know, we need to hold this back for discussions about the reparations at the end of the war. There's not going to be reparations of a country if Russia takes the country. Mm-hmm. And so, having said that, since I started this whole thing, we've moved quite a bit, and everybody has agreed. Okay, it's not legal to take the money, but we can take the interest on the money, which is no more legal or less legal than taking the money. And so we're eventually going to get to the point where the question is going to emerge in all these countries, in the European Union, in the UK, do we want the taxpayers to pay or do we want Putin to pay? And once it becomes that question, that's a political question, that's not a bureaucratic question, then it will be resolved and the money will be taken.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone want to come in on this, on money? Please.
We have Magnitsky law, thanks to Bill. And it's also valid in European Union countries. And no, I wanted to say that, if I can, the question about how will relations between Europe and Russia look after the war? Well, that's the question I'm trying.
Can you envisage that?
Yeah, and this is my provocation, basically, about Korean scenario, because Russian generations, Russian young people should think about what will happen to them if this war freezes on the present front line. Because God bless to multilateralism, but I only see in the world now two superpowers. One is outspoken, which is United States, and the other is pretty introverted, or hideous, which is China. And China is supporting Russia so much that if this Korean scenario happens, I don't know whether Russians can escape to their Chinese future. In terms, yeah. So they will have to decide to finish this war in a manner that will give prospect to young Russians or to Russia to become European or Asian European state again, or will it for a long time be separated from Europe and be connected to Asia?
Let me just can we just pick up the two thoughts from Julia and Nicola. Do you want to come in, Olexandr? Yeah. We've got 11 minutes to run, so I'd like quick answers.
Very shortly answer. Impunity and impeachment create possibility for next war. That's what we need to create situation for punishment all regime of Putin. It will be end of war. Without it, it will be create new possibility for new war. That's why establishing a criminal tribunal is very important things. We need to bring all people headed by Putin to this tribunal. First of all, now it will prevent us, for all of us, not only Ukraine. It's case concerning all of us. That's why I'm absolutely sure that our peace agreement will be creates possibility to bring them for punishment. That's my answer.
Radmila.
Fully agree with what Olexandr said. What happens and what will happen to Ukraine will echo, and that will affect how aggressive leaders, how aggressive prime ministers and president consider a next territorial integrity challenge. So it is a test, not only for Ukraine, it is a test for Europe and for us. But on the issue of how do we define our policies vis-à-vis Russia in the future, I think what has happened, at least in NATO, and I think what happens in EU shows this as well, is that even if the war in Ukraine finishes tomorrow, nobody expects that we will go back business as usual pre-2020 or pre-2014, because the confidence has been lost, and all the people or politicians who were preaching different narratives were utterly proven wrong. So there will be a need for a completely different process in which European countries will stop if Russia completely changed the pattern.
We should remind everyone.
But 5% for defense spending is there in the NATO Hague summit, because we don't believe that we can go back business as usual.
We should remind people that Putin once raised the prospect of Russia joining NATO.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a Russia office at NATO.
Yeah, yeah.
Quick answer on both. One on process with Russia. As Radmila says, there is no expectation Russia going back to some type of peaceful country. That's why NATO's defense plans are planned against Russian capabilities. That's why specific 5%, that's why 3.5% for hard defense, because that's the capability targets and the actual stuff that we need as allies to make sure that nothing happens to ourselves. From that also, it means that supporting Ukraine is more viable, so pretty straightforward. And then on international law and what it means, you know, in a wider sort of trust in international system. Remember, Ukraine, the first things that Ukraine did was actually on the basis of Article 2 to turn to the UN Security Council and request Security Council to take action on the violations that Russia was doing. So Russia vetoed the ability of the UN to act. And then Article 51, which is right to self-defense, individually and collectively, on which also NATO is based, was used for Ukraine's self-defense. And that's why when NATO actually, as allies, we analyzed whether we become party of the war if we provide Ukraine with weapons and with other assistance. The answer was no, because the Article 51 covers self-defense, it covers others providing rights to self-defense and means to for self-defense, And no, neither NATO nor allies nor anybody else helping Ukraine does not become party to the war. So we are succeeding Slovenia in the Security Council from 1st January. And we will be very, very, very much looking to actually this trust in international law, these standards that the UN Charter embodies, that countries, wherever they are, in Africa, Asia, wherever, they don't want to be invaded by their neighbors. It's
so
really, it's really basic law.
You a little bit. Zeki, can you just hang on one moment? Yeah. Let me get another question. We've got about 7 minutes to run.
David Eddington, Chairman of the Royal United Services Institute in London and former British Government Minister. Given that there are some capabilities, notably intelligence sharing, where the Europeans cannot just substitute for what the Americans provide, what are the arguments the panel think most likely to persuade not only this president but the political leadership of the United States over the next few years that they should remain committed to keeping Ukraine strong and in the fight, rather than, to use the phrase, walk away?
David, do you have a view? You were a Deputy Prime Minister.
My view is that your starting point has to be that the Europeans need to show that they are taking a bigger share now, but I think my view is that the tactic of being frank, sort of deferential to President Trump is probably the right one, however humiliating it may be at the moment. But I hope that whether it's Starmer or Macron or Merz or anybody else are privately really dedicating themselves to make us less dependent on the US for help for Ukraine insofar as we can do that. But some of this will take 10 years.
All right, the diplomacy of flattery. Who else would like to... Can I just check if anyone else has a microphone? Where? Okay, I'll come to you in a moment. Good, please. Sir.
On the intel, just a quick add-on to what David was saying is actually that it's a mutual action. There's so much that the Five Eyes get from the other partners actually without knowing that is coming from others. And the sort of fusion of all that intel knowledge, the understanding of that intel knowledge, what Ukrainians are doing but also using, there is a lot of joint sort of benefit that is being drawn, and I'm not even saying what the relationship is with Turkey and others for the situation in the Middle East and so on and so forth. So it's, you cannot take one letter out of the wider equation on the joint intel work, because security interests and threats are not just in one.
Radmila.
Just one sentence. This is one of the reasons. There are several reasons why on the security guarantees the discussions are ongoing, including a US involvement. And we do believe that these robust security guarantees are the right message to Ukraine, the right support to Ukraine, but also a right message to Moscow.
Thank you. One question here, because I realize you have to leave in about 4 minutes to get a plane.
I am a Ukrainian refugee, and my question, in my opinion, is this main important section in Bled conference now, because if Ukraine fall, didn't exist any option for optimistic European future. This real, just now, like 1939, and we are, and in my opinion, a lot of country, a lot of politics did understand this, playing the political game. Or I live in Slovenia from where it started. For example, in Slovenia, very strong Russian propaganda. And I listen to this politics second year. Every year, support young Russian, good Russian. And I'm not my question, why? Why politicians didn't understand serious of situation?
All right, in the limited time we've got available, let me put that to the politicians. You don't fully understand the enormity of what is happening.
Not only Slovenia, it is this brave country.
We've got the message.
Yeah, please.
I can answer you by Ukrainian or by English. Yeah, it's not so right, because you know, all countries support us. You can compare the first stage of war. Putin occupied huge territory of Ukraine. You can compare to last year. it's a smaller cost, absolutely minimum. It means that through support of international community, we upgrade facilities of our army, we can reject attack of Putin. That means that politicians understand. Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's a different speed of understanding, different readiness to support. Somebody immediately give us assistance, but somebody postpone, etc. But nevertheless, it's normal way, because you're going to bring all together. It's a difficult task, but nevertheless, 3.5 years we stand, we fight, and we will win.
Radmila.
Yeah. Thank you for these words. I mean, here are the people who are convinced. What we call upon when we use these pleas, we say Ukraine's security is really our security. And also our deterrence and defense is an attempt to support Ukraine. But this is why I will use your question again to plea all allies and member states present here, please find a way in these crucial times, while the attacks in Ukraine are harshest and very much civilian-oriented, we have to pull our weight and we have to help them. Is it through Pearl, through direct assistance to drone industry in Ukraine, or in any other way, bilateral, multilateral? It doesn't matter. It is important that this life-saving ammunition and air defense reaches Ukraine, and this is how we help them.
Zeki, final thought, and then one more intervention, then I have to wrap it up.
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to come in the previous round to somewhat challenge the assumption that Russia is not interested in peace because it is not in a weak position. I would not challenge it in a positive way, because I mean, if we put things into perspective, we can easily see that Russia is not in a better position compared to 2022. I mean, what was thought to be a few weeks of special military operation is now a full-scale war in its 4th year, with huge economic and human losses for Russia. And as far as I can see, the sanctions are also biting. So there is indeed a real prospect for peace. But I mean, it's all about how we can induce or compel the parties to come to the table. And as to what we can do, Europeans and the US, in that, I think we have a significant role to play with the necessary sticks and carrots. And among them, of course, most important of which is the continued support to Ukraine in terms of defensive capabilities so that they can hold their lines and defend their country, but also about the short and long-term security guarantees that will have to be provided to Ukraine for the aftermath of any peace deal or ceasefire. And I think in that regard, do not really overlook at it. The capability of the willing countries set up by the Europeans at the beginning of this year has already drafted some detailed military plans for that purpose. And in response to the question that is provided by the gentleman behind, the US administration recent decision to support and contribute to these plans is, I believe, an extremely significant step, which I hope might make it easier for both parties to take those hard and bold steps that can pave the way for a final, fair and lasting peace.
Thank you, Zeki. Baiba.
Just a final word. I can't imagine Turkey recognizing the north of the Black Sea as Russian. I really cannot imagine.
We have always said that, our firm support to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine is steadfast. That will never change at all. And we repeatedly condemned Russia's invasion and annexation of Ukrainian territories, and we said we will never recognize that from the very outset in 2014.
But also that shows the wider scope, how much unity there is, not only in NATO or in the EU, but around the world. I have heard those same sentences from the others in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, and so on and so forth. Because at the end, we are in it together. There is a basic rule that we need to observe. And the fact is that as far as NATO allies or Ukraine or others is concerned, Ukraine was fighting the war before 2014. It was a sub-conventional war because Russian warfare doctrine is one. It's not only conventional war, it's a lot of sub-conventional. Because they are trying to get their objectives, and that's the cheapest way how to get it, to get influence, to get control, through other means. Economy, propaganda, corruption, cyber, hack and leak, and that is what will continue. So the answer is that we have to recognize there's a Russian warfare doctrine that is turned towards us, against us. And maintaining that ability to make our own decisions is crucially important.
Well, look, thank you all. Radmila had to leave because there's a plane in an hour from now, and we can't stop the plane. Olexandr, I hope we've been frank enough to justify the discussion that you wanted. That you're not going to go back to Kiev saying, actually, they bottled out when it came to these very, very difficult questions. But I'm not convinced that peace is anywhere close at hand at the moment, judging by what, and we have a shaking head there.
But we believe
so we've tried to illuminate it. When this was decided to have as a panel, no one could have known that there would be Anchorage, and then there would be the extraordinary events in the White House 2 weeks ago. And as far as I'm concerned, or I know from my iPhone, nothing has been announced today of a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. So where are we? Well, the day is yet to be finished, but the 2-week deadline is still ticking. Thank you all very much indeed. A lot of a great variety of perspectives which I've tried to knit together. Thank you for your contributions from the floor, and I invite Ali back.
Thank you so much, Nik. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, indeed. Long road to peace. Thank you, Nik, as always, a stellar job. Thank you to our distinguished panelists for this very insightful debate. If I can ask the gentleman to slowly vacate the stage, because we actually have